Welcome all of you to the point editorial discussion by me Vayes. In this video, we are going to comprehensively discuss all the editorial articles of the Hindu newspaper of 3rd July 2024. We have one article for detailed discussion today from the exam perspective, which is on AI governance. The other articles, we'll have a quick overview. We have an article on Wimbledon, which is being noted for a transition in tennis history. Then we have an article on the industrial output data, which is the data relating to the core industries. We have an academic article written by an academic in cultural theory. He talks about the idea of liberalism here. We have an article by the French ambassador to India. He talks about India-French partnership and the recent developments. We have an article based on Tamil Nadu in the state of play section, which deals with a specific airport. Finally, we have the data point on the amount of loans that is being given to retail borrowers in recent times. So let's start with a quick overview. As I said, the first quick overview article is on the recently released Purchasing Manufacturers Index. So it deals with the performance of our core industries. So I have noted down the 8 core industries here: coal, electricity, crude oil, fertilizer, cement, natural gas, refinery products, and steel. So the important event that happened in the last quarter was heat wave. It is in this context you have to understand the expansion or the contraction of all these things. When there is a heat wave, there needs to be more electricity generated because naturally people will use more ACs and fans. As a result, there will be more expansion in the coal sector because most of our power plants are thermal power plants. So if you take the energy production in India, majority is dominated by thermal power plants. UPSC in fact has asked a question in 2024 prelims related to this as well. So because of that, there is an expansion in the coal sector. The electricity sector also saw an expansion. Naturally, it is linked to the heat waves, the cooling needs of the country. But subsequently, there is a shrinkage in sectors like crude oil, fertilizer, and cement. Because if you take cement, take the construction sector. When there is a heat wave, the construction sector will be affected because people cannot, in many states, there were regulations restricting the amount of work that takes place between 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So in that regard, construction sector will be affected. The fertilizer sector is also affected. Crude oil sector is also affected. So these things are linked and there is a shrinkage. When it comes to the 3 other sectors, which is natural gas, refineries, and steels, we don't have a shrinkage, but the output expansion has decelerated. So if the output expansion was going like this, now it is going like this. So like output expansion has decelerated, but there is no shrinkage. This is a very contemporary trend. It can change anyway. So in the larger perspective of a UPSC exam, it doesn't make much of an input for you, but you can understand the 8 core sectors from this and the trends in the current scenario from this article. Let's move to the next one. As I said, it is related to Wimbledon. So for prelims, understanding the sports events and its nature is very important. Wimbledon is a tournament that takes place in the tennis arena. It takes place in UK. Wimbledon is a place in Britain. So it is a grass court tournament. So usually in tennis, you have synthetic courts, you have grass courts, then you have clay courts. If you take the French Open that takes place in France, it is clay court. So right now the Olympics is also going to take place in France, which is Paris. There you will have a clay court game with respect to tennis. And Wimbledon is the famous grass court event. And why the Hindu has written an article on it is because this is marking the transition phase in tennis. Because there are 4 giants when it comes to tennis in the contemporary era. One is Roger Federer, he has retired. Second is Rafael Nadal. So he participated in the recently concluded French Open, but he got eliminated in the preliminary rounds, so he will not be participating in the Wimbledon. Then you have Andy Murray. Andy Murray is only participating in the doubles with his brother. Then you have Novak Djokovic. Djokovic is also coming out of an injury. So they are not favorites in this particular tournament. Instead, you have the new generation like Carlos Alcaraz of Spain coming into the forefront. So this marks a transition in tennis in the men's era. When it comes to the women also, there is a transition because you don't have the Williams sisters here. Both Serena Williams and Venus Williams are not playing. And you have new generation like Iga Swiatek of Poland, Sabalenka of Italy, etc. So why these giants becomes important is because since 2003 to 2023, they have won 19 out of 20 championships. So that was the domination that these people had in this particular sport. So these are big names, and this marks a transition in the sport of tennis. So that's the takeaway from this particular editorial. Now this one is an academic article. It's written by a professor who taught in Punjab University. So it's a cultural theorist. So this is very academic in nature. So the crux of the argument is he discusses the idea of liberalism. And the title itself says that it is in dark times. So he argues liberalism is a value that keeps power in check. How this happens is because every individual seeks liberty at present times. So what states or what power does is to control individuals. So when individual seeks liberty, it acts as a natural check on power. When state tries to put control on what you eat, what you wear, how you speak, your privacy, your liberty comes into question, and you will resist that and keeps power in check. So that's how this idea works. It works in the other way as well when we talk about the idea of negative liberty and positive liberty in the Indian context. We have the Article 19, which is not absolute in nature. Article 19 deals with freedom of expression, which is a liberal principle, but it is not absolute in nature, because your freedom to express should be in reckonance with some other person's freedom to express as well. So you cannot compromise the other person's freedom when you are expressing yourself. If you're compromising that, it becomes negative liberty. So liberty in that sense checks the power between individuals as well. So that's the value. What the author says is that this value is facing an existential crisis. He quotes the recent rise of far right in Europe. So you know that European Union, the European Parliament, recently concluded their elections. And in that particular elections, the far right emerged victorious. If you take the case of France, French President Emmanuel Macron even dissolved his assembly prematurely to face the elections because of the change in trend in the elections. So far right, if you take the case of America, Donald Trump is very likely to come back to power, and Donald Trump is a far right leader. The features of the far right is anti-migration policies, pro-nationalistic policies, ethnic nationalism, etc. So far right, when far right comes into picture, it acts as an existential crisis for liberty. And this is cited with the example of Europe. And the author says that amidst this international wave, Indian voters stood still. So despite the surge in far right or right-wing forces all over the world, Indian voters denied to give a right-wing party an absolute majority in the parliament, and that's something that is very hopeful for the idea of liberty. So that's the idea behind this article. Let's move to the next article written by the French ambassador to India. So he starts with a very generalistic perspective. He talks about the Indo-French Horizon 2047. So any answer on mains in India-France relations should have this keyword. This is something that is a pillar-like policy when it comes to Indo-French relations. So we have an Indo-French Horizon to 247. In that we have 3-4 pillars and 3 main pillars and many subsections. And one of the pillars is now partnership for planet. So it has been elevated to one of the pillars. So climate cooperation is the major pillar. The author starts the article with that and comes to the agency of AFD, that is the French Development Agency. He says that the French Development Agency commissions a lot of projects in India, including the rhino conservation in Assam, or the Pune metro system, or the Chandigarh's future water supply systems. So these projects are being funded by the French Development Agency, and this is a pillar or a cornerstone when it comes to Indo-French relations. The author goes on explaining the merits or the kind of engagement this agency is having with India. So that there it becomes very specific, but you can take these keywords from this particular article. Now moving to the next article, it deals with the state of Tamil Nadu and specifically with the HOSUR International Airport, which is set to come in Krishnagiri. So Krishnagiri is located close to Bangalore, somewhere here. So here you have the Karnataka border and Bangalore is located here. Krishnagiri is close to here. You have the Dharmaburi and Salem districts here. And when this project comes into force, there are some controversies as well as advantages. The controversy is it is within 150-kilometer mark of the Kempegowda International Airport in Bangalore. Kempegowda International Airport is a greenfield project. It's a greenfield project, and there was an agreement. It's a concessional agreement that was signed in 2008, which says that there shouldn't be new airports being commissioned within new airport commissioned within 150-kilometer range of the Kempegowda International Airport for 15 years. So that means until 2033 you cannot commission an airport, and this was given as a reply by the Union Minister in a question raised in Parliament. When this is there, you cannot have the airport here, but the government is trying for regulatory relaxations, because this airport is very important, because Krishnagiri district has emerged as a hub of auto and electronic manufacturing in recent times. So this airport is going to be stimulative in effect with respect to the economic domain of that particular area and the state as a whole. So it is an important project for Tamil Nadu, but there is a bottleneck like this. Let's move to the data point finally. I'll explain this as a story. So until 2010s, in 2008, you have the big financial crisis in the world led by Lehman Brothers in US. It had its impact in India as well. India withstood this with something called the Mukherjee stimulus. Pranab Mukherjee was the finance minister at that time. Manmohan Singh was the prime minister. They had a policy called Mukherjee stimulus. They pumped money into the economy. They gave big loans to industrialists, and India withstood this international crisis. And you know that privatization, liberalization and globalization started in India since 1991 economic reforms. So in 2010, the India also experienced near double-digit growth of 10%. But this was brewing up a crisis. When it came to the 2010 to 15 period, we had a lot of defaulters, big industrialists defaulting on their loans. It was almost 10%. That means 1 in every 10 loan was a bad loan. And banks were in very bad light. Some of them fled the country, like Vijay Mallya's famous case, you know that. So the banks and government came up with a lot of countermeasures. One is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016. And banks were very reluctant to lend to big industrialists and houses, and they started lending to small retailers. And at present, if you take the gross NPA, it is at a decadal low in March 2024. So banks did well to curb the NPAs, but as a result, the shifting pattern shifted more towards retail borrowers than big industrialites. So that's the takeaway from the Hindu data point. It will give you a trend of the recent economic happenings. Finally, we'll come to the article for the detailed discussion on AI governance. It is important for GS2 paper, governance, and for science and technology paper as well, because it deals with artificial intelligence. Here you have a question in 2018 with regard to e-governance. So what exactly is the issue with AI at present? Because when we talk about AI, we are not talking about the basics of machine learning or artificial intelligence. We are talking about generative AI or the large language models like ChatGPT or Gemini. So what these large language models does is they'll give you information. But how do we consider them? Are they social media? Are they websites? What are they? So when ChatGPT provides you with some information, who is responsible for that information? Is the user who gives the prompt, that means the user who asks the question, is he responsible, or is he or she responsible for that? Or is the ChatGPT or the platform responsible for that? That is one question. Second, if the user using his prompts develops some kind of a content through that. For example, if you look at Meta now, Meta has launched this blue ring in WhatsApp right nowadays. You can generate images through that. So if you are giving a prompt idea and if you are developing an image, who is responsible for the copyright of that? Is it the machine? Is it the algorithm? Or is it the person? So there you have the issue of co-authorship. And finally, as I said, who is to be credited for the copyrights? Because these large language models are being trained using some amount of data. They need data because they don't generate the data. They study data, then regenerate it. So they get data from sources like newspapers, websites, blogs, books, etc. So who should be credited for the data they are producing? Is it the newspaper, books, or the platform itself? So these are big questions, and our governance framework that we have now is ill-equipped to deal with these very novel issues. the cases and the laws that are regarding this, if you look at that, we have the Shreya Singhal case in which the Supreme Court said that Section 79 of the IT Act should be upheld, which deals with the safe harbor mechanism. Safe harbor mechanism is if a particular entity like this or anything, take Facebook for example, if they comply with the due diligence standards set by the government, they should be given a safe harbor mechanism. It should be the user who should be liable for what they are doing instead of the platform. That is the safe harbor mechanism. In Christian Louboutin Sash versus Nagul Bajaj case, the Delhi High Court said that safe harbor mechanism applies only to passive intermediaries. That means intermediaries who doesn't actively deal with content but just acts as a platform. So it doesn't apply to cases like generative AI because they are not passive intermediaries. They in fact tweak or they in fact mold the data in a way the user wants it. Now, if you take the Puttaswamy judgment, it was a landmark judgment when it comes to the idea of privacy. You cannot talk about any answer or any discourse on artificial intelligence or e-governance without referring to the Puttaswamy judgment, and that led to the formation of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. Again, this act is also not good enough or comprehensive enough to deal with the issues raised by generative AI. So what do we do now? First, what we can do is to have a sandbox approach. Sandbox means a regulatory framework where you let the financial tech or the technologies like artificial intelligence to work. It is like a beta mode working setup where these things are given some concessions. Otherwise, what happens is when you regulate these innovations with an iron fist, what happens is innovation will be restricted. They will move to countries that are very relaxed in nature. So you cannot have a very stringent law against them because it will curb innovation. What you can do is to provide them with a sandbox kind of approach where they can come up with innovations and regulate them accordingly with some kind of a grace period. Second, centralized licensing for web data. Right now, we don't have a centralized licensing. You have X amount of websites, you have Y amount of images, you have all sorts of content in the web. You don't have a centralized licensing system. So what you can do is to have a centralized licensing system like the Getty Images, where they license the stock images with their watermark. So this is an example you can use. And finally, there should be a revenue sharing model. For example, if ChatGPT is using data from New York Times should get a reasonable share for the data that ChatGPT has used. That's how this issue can be solved. For that, we need a regulatory framework which is not yet there. That's the takeaway, comprehensive understanding from this particular article and the Hindu editorial page as a whole. Thank you for listening.